Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie How to Train Your Dragon 2, 2014, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. There are sequels that follow, and then there are sequels that soar. How to Train Your Dragon 2 doesn't just continue the story. It launches it skyward with the kind of majesty and emotional depth that few animated films dare to attempt. It's the kind of film that grabs your hand, sweeps you off the ground on the back of a dragon, and takes you someplace unexpected. Somewhere colder, wilder, older, somewhere full of truth. The island of Berk has changed. The dragon-human war that once defined it is now a relic of the past, and in its place stands something new. Harmony. Dragons no longer haunt the skies as enemies. They live among the people now, perched on rooftops, racing in arenas, snuggling beside hearths. It's a new era of understanding, of exploration, of peace. At the heart of this evolving world stands Hiccup, no longer just a gangly misfit but a young man trying to understand what kind of leader he's meant to be. He's older now, and so is Toothless. Their bond is deeper, wordless in its understanding. Hiccup flies not to escape anymore, but to discover. He maps the world beyond Berk's borders, curious about what lies in the uncharted territories. But while Hiccup searches for answers in the clouds, something far darker brews on the horizon. There are whispers, rumors of a dragon army, of a man who enslaves dragons instead of befriending them. And soon those whispers take shape. They come with sails, with fire, with ice. Enter Drago Bloodfist, a name spoken with fear, even by the boldest of warriors. Drago is a conqueror, a tyrant who believes dragons must be dominated through pain and control. He doesn't see them as creatures of beauty or intelligence. He sees them as weapons. And he's building something terrible. An army of enslaved dragons, led by a monstrous alpha, a bewilderbeast the size of a mountain with breath that freezes everything it touches. Drago's arrival sends shockwaves through the Viking world, and Hiccup finds himself staring at a conflict that cannot be avoided. But just as war looms, the past sends a message of its own. In a forgotten corner of the world, Hiccup meets someone he never thought he'd see again. His mother. Valka. A dragon rescuer. A mystery. A living piece of the story Hiccup never had. Her reappearance reshapes everything Hiccup thought he knew about himself. About dragons. About his parents. For years, he believed his mother had died. In truth, she had chosen to stay hidden, living among dragons, protecting them from the very kinds of men Drago represents. Their reunion is not soft. It's breathless, tearful, and beautifully wild. Valka is not what Hiccup expected. She's fierce, untamed, and full of the same fire he carries within. As she introduces him to the hidden dragon sanctuary she calls home, Hiccup sees for the first time a world where dragons can live free, unafraid. A vision of what peace might look like beyond Berk. But that vision doesn't last long. Because Drago is coming. And he doesn't make room for visions. Only power. As Drago's forces advance, the film pivots from discovery to confrontation. Stoic, Hiccup's father, the proud and battle-hardened chief of Berk, joins the fight. His relationship with Hiccup has always been one of love tangled in misunderstanding, but here it becomes something deeper. Reconciliation, trust, and heartbreak. Because when Drago's army arrives, they don't come with swords alone, they come with the bewilderbeast. And in one devastating moment, everything changes. The Alpha seizes control of Toothless. It's a moment that slices through the film like lightning. The loyal, brave Night Fury, Hiccup's best friend, his soulmate, falls under the Alpha's trance. His eyes go blank. His wings freeze. And then, with no warning, he fires. The shot is precise. And Stoic falls. The moment is nearly silent. No music. Just gasps. Grief. And Hiccup, staring at the smoking space where his father once stood. It's a turning point that no one saw coming. An emotional earthquake that shakes the entire film off its expected course. Because now, the conflict is no longer theoretical. It's no longer about ideas or philosophies. It's personal. A father is gone. A son is left behind. And a dragon, the most loyal creature in Hiccup's world, is the one who pulled the trigger. But the film doesn't stop there. It doesn't wallow. It rises. Hiccup, broken and enraged, turns away from Toothless. In his pain, he can't look at him. But when Drago takes Toothless, when he mounts him and declares him his own, it's Valka who reminds Hiccup who he truly is. Not a warrior. Not a killer. A uniters. A voice that speaks to both man and dragon, and that voice isn't done yet. In the final act, the battle that unfolds is a storm of ice and fire. Drago unleashes his enslaved dragons. The bewilderbeast roars. But something changes in the chaos. Toothless resists. Against the Alpha's control, against the pain, he rises. And Hiccup, finally, steps into who he was always meant to be. Not just the bridge between two worlds, but the leader of them. Toothless challenges the Alpha. Not with brute force, but with heart. With defiance. And in the end, the Night Fury does what no other dragon has done. He breaks the chain. He becomes Alpha. And Drago is defeated, not by war, but by unity. By trust. The film ends not in triumph, but in balance. Berk has lost a chief, but gained a new one. Hiccup, now ready, accepts his place. Not because he wants power, but because he's ready to carry the weight of peace. He buries his father. He honors his mother. And beside him, always, is Toothless. Together, they are something new. Something the world has never seen. How to Train Your Dragon 2 is not just a sequel. It's a transformation. It deepens the world we thought we knew, complicates the characters we love, and reminds us that growing up is not about shedding innocence, it's about choosing courage. Choosing connection. Choosing, again and again, to believe that even in a world of monsters, kindness can win. And if you think you know how this story ends, just wait. Because the skies of Berk still hold secrets. And some dragons? Some dragons still have stories left to tell. 5 years had passed since Berk learned to fly. Once a village of clumsy, dragon-fearing Vikings tucked between cliffs and stormy seas, Berk had blossomed into a place of wonder, where sheep now shared the skies with fire-breathers, and dragon races had become a booming sport, wild and chaotic and unmistakably Berkian. Smoke trails curled around rooftops, kids surfed on scaly backs, and every home had a dragon-sized roost, because dragons weren't pests anymore. They were family. In the midst of this aerial utopia, Hiccup soared like a shadow on the wind. No longer the awkward boy who once tried to trap a dragon in the woods, Hiccup had become a quiet force in the sky. His armor was stitched from dragon scales, sleek and hand-forged, built not for war but for movement. On Toothless, his ever-loyal Night Fury, he sliced through clouds and gusts, mapping the archipelago that stretched beyond the edge of every known chart. Not because he had to, but because he couldn't stop. Discovery burned inside him. It was how he breathed. But he wasn't alone up there. Astrid rode nearby, fearless and fast, her dragon Stormfly glittering against the sun. Their banter was easy now, filled with old jokes and knowing glances. Behind them, other familiar faces darted through the skies, Snotlout still showing off, Roughnut and Toughnut still bickering, Fishlegs rattling off dragon facts mid-flight. They were older now, yes, but their rhythm remained the same. A dragon squad, tighter than ever. The air above Berk had become a canvas, and Hiccup painted it with maps. Each flight added a new stroke, new islands, strange rock formations, abandoned ships drifting through mist. But it wasn't all beautiful. Something had changed in the world. Rumors drifted in like fog. Sightings of scorched hulls. Whispers of dragon trappers, brutal and fast. And then came the spiked sails. One day, as Hiccup and Astrid traced the jagged edge of a cliff, they spotted smoke rising in the distance. A village. Burned. The ground was littered with shattered crates, broken traps, and the unmistakable signs of dragon struggle. Scorch marks, claw gouges, feathers from unknown wings. But what chilled Hiccup wasn't what he saw. It was what the villagers said. A man named Eret had arrived, part of a crew capturing dragons for someone even worse, Drago Bloodfist. The name hit the air like a storm cloud. Back in Berk, Stoik heard the report and stiffened. The chief of Berk, Hiccup's father, a man carved from granite and sea salt, had heard that name before. And he feared it. Long ago, Drago had appeared at a gathering of chieftains, demanding obedience in exchange for safety. When the others laughed, he unleashed dragons, not as companions, but as weapons. Only Stoik survived. Drago was not a man who asked twice. Hiccup, ever the idealist, refused to believe that diplomacy was impossible. "There has to be another way," he told Stoik. "We've changed. We made peace. Maybe he can too." But Stoik knew better. Some men didn't want peace. Some men saw dragons as nothing but tools. And Drago wanted a war. Still, Hiccup had to try. That was who he was. Not a warrior. A bridge. So he and Toothless flew out again, higher and farther, into the swirling winds and sea mists where dragon hunters prowled. That's when they crossed paths with Eret. Cocky, skeptical, and clearly in over his head, Eret was everything Hiccup wasn't. He bragged about his traps, his dragon captures, his allegiance to Drago. But his boat was barely holding together, and his crew wasn't much better. Toothless could have flattened the entire vessel with a single shot, but Hiccup didn't fight. Instead, he listened. And what he heard painted a clearer picture of the threat. Drago was amassing dragons. Not training them. Enslaving them. Turning them into a fire-breathing armada. Eret didn't believe in friendship with dragons. Until, of course, he saw Toothless let Hiccup fly without reins. Until Stormfly licked his face like a curious puppy. Until he realized that dragons, when loved, could love back. But before that trust could build, before Hiccup could win him over, war found them. Explosions tore through the sky. Drago's scouts. Spiked nets and fireballs rained down, separating dragons from riders. Hiccup and Toothless dove into the chaos, dodging flares and debris. The sea boiled beneath them as a massive shape rose from the waves, a warship with chains thicker than masts and cages stacked like coffins. Berk's dragons were being taken. The sky burned. Back in Berk, Stoik made his decision. No more waiting. They would prepare for war. Dragons were harnessed with armor. Watchposts were reinforced. Stoik readied for battle not because he wanted it, but because he knew what Drago would bring. And Hiccup? He disappeared into the clouds again. Not to run. To understand. He had to know what was out there. What kind of man Drago really was. What kind of future they were flying toward. But the world had other plans. As he and Toothless crossed a jagged ridge of ice peaks, a sudden burst of movement knocked them from the sky. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't fire. It was wind. Huge wings, shimmering with white and blue, streaked past. Hiccup barely had time to regain control before a hooded figure swept in, riding a dragon unlike any he'd seen. Long, graceful, with a fur-lined saddle and an aura of control. The figure moved like a ghost, cutting through the air with practiced ease, then vanishing behind a column of steam. Toothless growled. Curious. Cautious. And then the figure returned. They didn't speak. Just circled. Watched. Tested. And then, finally, they gestured. "Follow me." Hiccup did. They flew deeper into the fog, where the cliffs rose like frozen teeth and steam vents hissed from the earth. And then, like a dream unfolding, a sanctuary appeared. Dragons. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Flying free. Diving into waterfalls, curling around trees, basking on sun-soaked stone. It was unlike anything Hiccup had ever seen. A hidden world. A place where dragons ruled. Where they didn't serve humans, they lived beside them. And in the center of it all stood a creature out of myth, the Alpha. A bewilderbeast. Towering. Gentle. Its breath misted into snowfall. Its tusks stretched like branches from an ancient tree. And around it, dragons bowed, not out of fear, but reverence. The hooded figure dismounted, stepped forward, and removed the mask. Hiccup stopped breathing. It was her. His mother. Valka. Alive. Older, wild-eyed, wrapped in furs and purpose. She looked at him like he was both a miracle and a mirror. Her hands shook when she touched his face. And then she laughed. Then cried. Then laughed again. Everything he thought he knew cracked open. Valka hadn't died. She had been taken, yes, but not by dragons. By choice. She had chosen to stay here. To protect them. To understand them. She believed, even back then, that dragons were misunderstood. That they needed someone to speak for them. And when no one else would, she did. Hiccup listened, his mind reeling. He watched her glide across the sanctuary, watched her whisper to dragons, watched the way they moved around her like wind around a mountain. She didn't control them. She belonged with them. For the first time, Hiccup saw what his own life could become. Not just a future of peace, but one of belonging. And for a moment, in the midst of ice and flame, everything felt still. But far away, beyond the mountains, sails were rising. And they were black as night. The wind had shifted. Far beyond the sanctuary of dragons, dark sails cut across the sea like blades. Stoic was coming, not to find war, but to find his son. And when he landed at the edge of that secret world and saw Valka, his wife, thought long dead, standing with Hiccup among a swirling storm of wings, the weight of 20 years crumbled in an instant. No words at first. Just the stunned silence of two lives that had diverged and somehow, impossibly, found their way back. Then her name from his lips, Val. It wasn't just a reunion. It was the stitching back together of something broken. For Hiccup, watching them, it felt like hope. Maybe his parents could find a way forward. Maybe there was a future in which dragons and humans, past and present, could coexist in something more than tolerance, in something like love. But Drago was still coming. Valka warned them. She'd seen what he could do. She'd watched villages fall, dragons chained and forced into servitude. And now he was hunting the Alpha, the mighty bewilderbeast that ruled the sanctuary. Drago didn't want just any dragon. He wanted the dragon, the one that could command all others. The Alpha's power wasn't magic. It was instinct, presence, a primal force that bound dragons to it. And Drago had his own. Another bewilderbeast. Bigger. Angrier. Trained through pain. When Drago arrived, he came with fire. Ice met flame in a collision that shook the sea cliffs. The bewilderbeasts roared, massive heads swaying, tusks locking. The sky fractured with wings as dragons shrieked and dove, caught in a power struggle far beyond their comprehension. Hiccup and Toothless raced into the chaos, desperate to protect the sanctuary. Stoic and Valka fought alongside them, trying to turn the tide. But Drago wasn't just ruthless. He was strategic. He let the bewilderbeasts fight. And as the Alpha weakened, as its calls grew faint, Drago's bewilderbeast surged forward. With one final push, it rose from the sea, let out a guttural cry, and the sanctuary's Alpha fell, defeated. Silence rippled through the dragons. Then submission. One by one they turned. Their eyes, once full of freedom, now clouded with the fog of control. Including Toothless. That moment was like watching light vanish. Hiccup called out to him, begged him to resist. But the power of the Alpha was ancient and overwhelming. Toothless' wings shifted. His pupils narrowed. And in a single, heart-crushing instant, he turned. Valka shouted. Stoic ran. And then the unthinkable happened. Toothless fired. The plasma blast cut through the air, direct, lethal. And Stoic moved. He threw himself into the shot. When it cleared, there was smoke. Silence. And Stoic, strong, fierce Stoic, was lying in the snow, motionless. Time fractured. Hiccup dropped to his knees. Valka screamed. Even Toothless, still under the Alpha's influence, blinked as if waking from a dream he couldn't understand. The shot had been perfect. It had come from the one creature Hiccup trusted most in the world. And it had taken his father. Drago, cold and triumphant, seized the moment. He chained Toothless, claimed him as his prize, and with a flick of his hand, ordered the dragon army to follow. The skies turned black as wings filled the air, vanishing into the fog. Hiccup was left on his knees in the snow, clutching his father's body, the sound of retreating dragons like thunder in his ears. Stoic's funeral was like watching a fire burn underwater. The tribe gathered. Torches flickered. A ship was prepared, carved with symbols and draped with furs. Hiccup laid his father there, his eyes hollow, his voice gone. Astrid stood beside him, silent. Valka placed her hand on his shoulder, gentle, grieving. When they lit the boat and pushed it into the sea, arrows soared to meet it, igniting the pyre. Flames rose against the night, crackling into the sky. And something inside Hiccup broke. Or maybe, something old finally fell away. He was no longer just the boy with ideas and maps. He was a leader now. A chief. Not because he wanted to be, but because he had to be. Drago had stolen his dragon, his father, and now threatened to steal everything else. And Hiccup would not let him. With a new resolve, Hiccup and his friends set out. Their dragons, too small to be affected by the bewilderbeast's control, became their allies. Astrid on Stormfly. Snotlout on Hookfang. Roughnut, Toughnut, Fishlegs, all of them ready to fight. Even Eret, the former dragon trapper, joined them. He had seen what real connection looked like, and he wanted to be part of it. The plan was reckless, brilliant, perfectly Hiccup. They would infiltrate Drago's fortress by air, distract the guards, and rescue Toothless. But nothing about it was easy. Drago's army was massive. The enslaved dragons, controlled by fear and the bewilderbeast's song, were relentless. Hiccup and his friends darted through them like needles, slipping past blasts of ice and flame, searching for a way in, and then Hiccup found him. Toothless, chained, eyes dim, still under the Alpha's sway. Hiccup approached slowly, hands open, voice low. He didn't beg this time. He remembered. He reminded Toothless of who they were, of the first time they flew, of the bond that went beyond commands, beyond fear, of the friendship that changed a world. And something flickered in those dragon eyes. A blink, a twitch, and then a spark. Toothless stepped forward. The Alpha roared. Ice thundered through the air. And Toothless, unchained, rose to meet it. The fight was no longer between armies. It was between hearts. Between one dragon ruled by dominance and another led by love. Toothless, small and fast, danced through the sky, his plasma blasts lighting up the clouds like lightning. The bewilderbeast tried to call him back, tried to crush him under its will. But Toothless would not bow. Not now. Not ever. And in that final charge, With Hiccup riding once more on his back, they soared straight at the beast. Through fire, through wind, through fear. Toothless unleashed a blast unlike any before, pure, bright, uncontainable. It struck the Alpha dead in the eye, shattering its hold. The dragons blinked, shook their heads, and remembered who they were. The bewilderbeast collapsed, wounded, defeated. The dragon army scattered. And Drago disappeared beneath the waves, his fate left to silence. In the stillness that followed, dragons descended like snowflakes, bowing not to an Alpha, but to Toothless. He had become more than a night fury. He had become a king. But he wasn't alone. Hiccup stood beside him. And together they rebuilt the future. Back in Berk, the scars remained. Stoic was gone, his absence echoing in every corner. But in his place, something new grew. Hiccup took up the mantle of chief, not just with words, but with action. He redesigned the village. He rebalanced the world. Dragons were not servants. They were family. And in the sky, high above the sea and snow, a boy and his dragon flew once more, not to escape, not to fight, but to lead. Together. Into the wind. In the world of Berk, characters don't just grow, they evolve like the dragons they ride, shaped by fire, wind, and the pull of the skies. How to Train Your Dragon 2 takes the foundations laid in the first film and builds upon them with deeper emotional resonance, forging its characters through grief, love, courage, and choices that leave lasting scars. The sequel doesn't simply age its characters, it challenges them, pushing them into territory where there are no right answers, only defining ones. And through this, we see not only who they are, but who they become. At the center of it all is Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III, the unlikeliest of leaders. He began as a misfit, a string of hesitation wrapped in oversized armor. In the first film, he found his voice through Toothless, learning that empathy and innovation could achieve what brute force never could. But in this second chapter, Hiccup is no longer seeking identity. He's trying to shape it. He is pulled between what he believes the world can be and what it might demand from him. Hiccup doesn't crave power. He doesn't hunger for legacy. What he wants is peace, between dragons and humans, between past and future. His refusal to accept the inevitability of war is both his greatest strength and his most dangerous flaw. Because peace, he learns, is not always a choice everyone wants. When he tries to reason with Drago, when he believes words and understanding will be enough, it backfires. Catastrophically. That idealism costs him dearly. His father's death is the shattering of that illusion, and the turning point in Hiccup's journey from hopeful explorer to reluctant but resolute leader. The transformation is painful but necessary. By the end of the film, Hiccup is no longer a boy with maps and dreams. He's a chief. Not because the title was handed to him, but because he's endured loss, made impossible choices, and still chosen to lead with compassion. His strength is not in domination, but in unity. And in choosing that, he becomes something rare, a hero who earns every ounce of trust not through conquest, but connection. Toothless, the night fury who once hid in the shadows, steps out into the light as well. No longer just Hiccup's companion, he becomes a symbol of loyalty, of instinct, of evolution. For most of the film, Toothless mirrors Hiccup's emotional arc: curious, brave, then manipulated, and finally, defiant. His subjugation by the bewilderbeast is heartbreaking not because he turns violent, but because it severs something sacred between him and Hiccup. When he fires at Stoic, when his eyes glaze over with forced obedience, we don't just see a dragon controlled, we see a friendship almost lost. But Toothless finds his way back. Through Hiccup's voice. Through memory. Through love. That return is a triumph not of power, but of bond. And it culminates in the ultimate transformation, when he stands against the Alpha. Not because he's stronger, but because he chooses to stand free. And when the dragons gather around him, bowing not in fear but in reverence, we realize he's no longer just the last of his kind, he's the first of a new kind. An alpha not of control, but of choice. Stoic the Vast, the warrior chief, is a character defined by contrasts. In the first film, he was the wall Hiccup had to climb. In the second, he becomes the foundation Hiccup learns to stand on. His arc is one of quiet redemption. His love for Hiccup, once buried under years of expectation and tradition, shines here with a warmth that's both proud and gentle. He accepts that Hiccup is not like him, and he's proud of that. His reunion with Valka is one of the film's most tender moments, revealing the softness beneath the stone. And his death. Well, his death isn't just the loss of a character. It's the loss of an era. When he falls, the torch is passed, not with ceremony, but with heartbreak. And it's that weight which forges Hiccup's rise. Valka, the long-lost mother, is a wild spirit wrapped in empathy. She exists in the film like a myth given flesh, moving through dragon flocks as if one of them. Her arc is less about transformation and more about reawakening. For 20 years, she believed that humans couldn't change, that dragons were safer apart from them. But when she sees Hiccup, sees what he's become, what he's built with Toothless, something in her shifts. Her return is not just a reunion with her son or her husband. It's a re-entry into humanity. And in choosing to fight alongside them again, she heals not only herself, but her family. Astrid Hofferson is Hiccup's anchor. Fierce and intelligent, she represents the best of what Burke has become, compassionate without weakness, strong without cruelty. Her relationship with Hiccup is steady and unspoken. There's no dramatic romance here. Instead, there's something better: partnership. She challenges him when he needs it. She leads when he falters. And her respect for him is never blind, it's earned. Astrid is the voice of reality in Hiccup's world of dreams. But even she, hardened and ready for war, believes in his vision. She's the one who reminds the others that Hiccup doesn't fail because he's soft. He succeeds because he believes. Among the supporting cast, Snotlout, Roughnut, Toughnut, and Fishlegs bring their usual chaos and charm, but they too have grown. Their humor is still slapstick, but there's a camaraderie that runs deeper now. Even Roughnut's ridiculous flirtation with Eret serves a purpose, breaking down the former dragon trapper's defenses. They're no longer just comic relief. They're the backbone of Hiccup's circle. The ones who follow not because they have to, but because they believe Eret, son of Eret, begins as an antagonist in name only. A mercenary, hardened and boastful, he captures dragons not out of malice, but survival. Yet when he sees the truth, when he watches dragons protect humans, when he sees Toothless loyalty, his transformation is swift and sincere. He's a reminder that change is possible. That even those raised to see dragons as beasts can learn to see them as brothers. And then there's Drago Bloodfist. A villain not born of vanity or vengeance, but of ideology. He believes dragons are weapons because he's only ever known pain. His body is scarred, his mind warped by survival. Drago doesn't seek control out of greed. He believes it's the only way to prevent chaos. And that belief makes him dangerous. He's not cartoonishly evil. He's deeply broken. And that complexity makes him a mirror to Hiccup, a vision of what could happen if one lets fear rule instead of empathy. Drago's arc doesn't bend. He doesn't redeem. And that choice is important. Because the film doesn't suggest everyone can change. Only that everyone has the capacity to choose differently. Hiccup and Toothless choose trust. Drago chooses domination. One path leads to unity. The other, to ruin. At its heart, How to Train Your Dragon 2 is a film about legacy. Each character is defined by what they inherit and what they choose to pass on. Hiccup inherits his father's village, but builds his own vision. Toothless inherits the title of Alpha, but redefines it through love. Valka returns to her family, not to reclaim what was, but to help shape what could be. And even in death, Stoic passes on something far more powerful than command. He passes on belief. That peace is worth fighting for. That compassion is not weakness. That dragons and people are at their best when they fly together. And in the end, each character does just that. They fly. Some films are made in the light, with crisp schedules and clean plans. Others, though, are born in flickers and drafts, carried on the backs of creative sparks, sudden changes, and the sort of behind-the-scenes stories that feel like legend by the time the credits roll. How to Train Your Dragon 2, 2014, belongs to the latter kind. Its story may soar on dragon wings across icy oceans and volcanic cliffs, but its production unfolded in bursts of inspiration, whispered improvisations, and unexpected twists that shaped the very heart of the movie. It began, strangely enough, with silence. After the success of the first How to Train Your Dragon, there was no immediate green light for a sequel. Instead, DreamWorks Animation gave writer-director Dean DeBlois a rare gift: freedom. They asked not just for one sequel, but a vision, a trilogy. And so DeBlois retreated into something like solitude, disappearing from the public eye to write not just the second film, but the bones of a three-part saga. He imagined not a continuation, but an evolution. Hiccup growing older, facing loss, finding strength, and yes, losing someone he loved. But here's where things took a strange turn. In the earliest drafts of How to Train Your Dragon 2, Stoic didn't die. Originally, it was Valka, Hiccup's mother, who perished in the climactic battle. Her story was meant to be brief, a flicker from the past. But as the script evolved and the emotional weight of the story deepened, DeBlois realized something profound. The loss that would shape Hiccup most was not reunion, but sacrifice. Valka, the mother who returned, could symbolize hope. But Stoic, his guidance, his armor, his stubborn love, was the legacy Hiccup had to inherit. And so, the script changed. Voicing that moment, the quiet before Stoic steps into the plasma blast, the grief that follows, was Gerard Butler. And according to several members of the crew, it broke the room. Even in a sound booth, with no visuals, Butler poured so much pain into his lines that the team went silent. After he recorded the funeral sequence, where Hiccup lights his father's ship, Butler reportedly stayed in the booth longer than needed, just breathing. No one moved. No one spoke. It was like being inside someone's goodbye, said one of the sound engineers. But it wasn't just the voice actors who blurred the lines between performance and emotion. Jay Baruchel, who voiced Hiccup, became so entwined with his character that animators began studying his facial expressions during sessions, not just to mimic them, but to understand Hiccup's inner world. His recorded hesitations, the little vocal stammers and sighs, became signature pieces of Hiccup's dialogue rhythm. In many cases, his ad-libs found their way into the final cut, not because they were funny, but because they were human. And then came the dragons. The animators treated them like living things. Each dragon species had its own biology, its own physics. Toothless, for instance, wasn't designed simply as a fantasy creature. He was modeled after cats, dogs, panthers, and horses. His body language was a Frankenstein's patchwork of the animal kingdom's most expressive beings. In fact, during production, animators would bring their pets to the studio, record their behavior, and use it to inform the dragon's movements. One scene, where Toothless pins his ears back and approaches Hiccup slowly after attacking Stoic, was directly inspired by a dog's guilty posture after knocking over a vase. But here's one of the strangest truths. Toothless' most iconic feature, his wide-eyed look of innocent curiosity, was inspired by an infant's facial proportions. Specifically, a baby's eye-to-head ratio. It was deliberate, subconscious, and devastatingly effective. Audiences found themselves melting toward Toothless, even when he was feral, even when he roared. Because deep down, something in those proportions made him feel like a child. Something to protect. The recording sessions for the film also took on a surreal quality. Unlike many animated productions where actors record separately, How to Train Your Dragon 2 often paired its performers together. Kristen Wiig, Ruffnut, and Jonah Hill, Snotlout, for instance, recorded many of their scenes as a duo, improvising far beyond the scripted lines. Their bickering energy was so infectious that the animators sometimes scrapped entire sequences just to rebuild around the wild new material. And then there's Ruffnut's unexpected flirtation with Eret, voiced by Kit Harington. Harington was still fresh off his rise as Jon Snow on Game of Thrones when he joined the cast, and Kristen Wiig couldn't resist leaning into it. In one recording session, she began improvising over-the-top compliments about his muscles, his hair, his face, and Harington, always the straight man, barely reacted. The animators loved the awkwardness so much, they rewrote Ruffnut's arc to include a running gag where she's hopelessly smitten with Eret. What began as a throwaway joke became one of the film's most memorable character beats. Production on the film took place over several years, and during that time, technology evolved rapidly. DreamWorks invested in a groundbreaking lighting system known as scalable light. It allowed for real-time adjustments to lighting within complex digital environments. Suddenly, sunlight could shift naturally through clouds. Fire could flicker across wet skin. Reflections moved across dragon eyes with the accuracy of live-action cinematography. It was subtle, but revolutionary. For many viewers, How to Train Your Dragon 2 looked more real than most live-action films of the time, even though not a single frame was filmed in camera. But not everything about production went smoothly. One major setback came from the soundtrack. Composer John Powell, who had created the sweeping, Celtic-infused score of the first film, initially hesitated to return. The emotional stakes of the sequel were higher, and he feared he couldn't top what he'd done before. But when he read the script, particularly the moment of Stoich's death, he changed his mind. He composed a new theme for Stoich and Valka, built around a simple motif of reunion and loss. The funeral sequence, scored with haunting bagpipes and fading strings, was written in a single night. Powell said he cried the whole time. But maybe the strangest detail of all lies not in what made it into the film, but what didn't. There was a scene, originally animated and voiced, where Hiccup dreams of a future Berk, a place without dragons. It was subtle, a quiet moment, a vision of what might one day come. But the creative team removed it. Too soon, they said. Too much. That moment would come, but not yet. Some bits of magic, though, happened by accident. The glowing blue plasma blasts toothless fires as an alpha weren't initially part of the plan. His upgrade was meant to be symbolic, not visual. But an animator experimenting with color theory created a test render where Toothless Blast glowed differently, richer, deeper. The team fell in love with it. That one tweak became iconic, signaling not just new power, but evolution. And then there's the film's most whispered secret. The closing shot, Hiccup and Toothless flying as Alpha and Chief, united in silhouette against the clouds, was animated and reanimated more than 20 times. Not because of technical error, but because no one could agree on how it should feel. Hopeful? Somber? Victorious? In the end, they settled on a blend. The music soars. The sky opens. But there's a softness in Hiccup's expression. A knowledge that nothing is ever permanent. That peace must be chosen. Protected. That some goodbyes are only waiting in the wings. When the film was released, it carried the weight of expectation. The first had been a sleeper hit. A cultural shift. The second had to grow up. And it did. It premiered to critical acclaim, earning praise for its emotional depth, stunning visuals, and mature storytelling. It was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. It won the Golden Globe. And it went on to solidify How to Train Your Dragon as one of the most beloved trilogies of its time. But behind the accolades and box office numbers lived a different kind of success. A crew of hundreds, working in digital silence, animated grief into firelight. They built worlds where dragons were more than beasts. where boys became leaders, where mothers returned, and fathers fell, and sons rose. And through strange notes, whispered improvisations, accidents, and dreams, they made something rare. A film that doesn't just entertain. It remembers, and invites you to fly with it one more time. Some stories live on the surface, gliding along plot and spectacle like ships on still water. Others, like How to Train Your Dragon 2, dive deeper, past the color and flight, down into the emotional currents that shape how we remember them. It isn't just a sequel. It's a turning point, a risk, a fire-lit path into the unknown that dared to ask, what happens when a boy becomes a man, and the world he thought he understood begins to shift under his feet? When the first How to Train Your Dragon landed in 2010, it was hailed as a visually spectacular but emotionally grounded coming-of-age tale. But its sequel, released 4 years later, chose a different flight path. It didn't simply extend the first film, it matured it. It aged with its characters. And critics took notice. At the heart of the film's critical acclaim lies its boldest choice, the death of Stoic the Vast. Animated films rarely kill off main characters. Rarer still is the decision to have that death arrive not from villainous monologue or explosive climax, but from a moment of misdirected love. Hiccup's own dragon, Toothless, fires the blast that ends Stoic's life, under the control of an alpha dragon, yes, but the emotional gut punch is undiluted. For a family film, this was staggering. Many critics pointed to this moment as the emotional anchor of the film. Not because of its shock, but because of its purpose. It isn't a narrative gimmick. It's the breaking point of Hiccup's idealism. Until that moment, Hiccup has believed in reason, in diplomacy, in words over war. He believes he can change Drago, that empathy can bridge any divide. And then, Toothless, wide-eyed and blank, fires. And Stoic, Hiccup's father, his contradiction, his compass, is gone. The silence that follows is deafening. It reframes the entire story. Critics praised the film's willingness to dwell in that silence. In grief. It doesn't leap into vengeance. It doesn't drown the pain in distraction. Instead, it pauses. Long enough for the audience, young and old alike, to feel. And that decision, that faith in the viewer's emotional intelligence, became one of the film's most celebrated elements. Thematically, Stoic's death also signals the film's most mature narrative thread, the passing of legacy. This is not a story of heroes defeating villains. It's a story of sons becoming fathers, of ideals being tested, burned, and reforged. Hiccup inherits Stoic's role not because he wins, but because he loses, and chooses to rise anyway. That nuance wasn't lost on critics. Many noted that the film reframes heroism not as triumph, but as endurance, as responsibility. And this theme finds its mirror in the character of Toothless. If Hiccup is grappling with grief and leadership, Toothless is wrestling with control. His arc isn't just about power, it's about agency. Under the Alpha's command, he becomes a weapon. But later, when he resists that control, when he stands, shaking but unbowed, against a force older and larger than himself, he becomes something new. An Alpha not through strength, but through choice. Critics lauded this inversion. That leadership, in both Hiccup and Toothless, doesn't come from domination. It comes from defiance. From a refusal to be ruled by fear. And in that moment, when Toothless glows with blue plasma, his wings stretched wide against the storm, he doesn't just defeat the Alpha. He redefines what an Alpha can be. That moment is more than visual spectacle. It's emotional catharsis. Another event that stirred critical discussion was the reappearance of Valka, Hiccup's mother, lost for 20 years, now revealed as a dragon guardian hidden in a forgotten world. Her introduction is soft and strange, emerging not from a plot twist, but from wonder. She moves like wind, speaks in whispers, lives among dragons as though she's part of them. And yet, her presence is more than backstory. It reframes the narrative of family. Stoic represents tradition, strength. Valka represents belief, compassion. And Hiccup is the bridge between them. In her, he sees what he might become. In Stoic, what he might lose. Critics admired how the film used Valka not to answer questions, but to pose new ones. About abandonment. About purpose. About the balance between protecting and participating. Some even saw her as a symbol of the fantasy genre's evolving role for mothers, not sidelined or sacrificed, but empowered, active, integral to the climax of the story. Her dynamic with Stoic, too, drew praise. Their reunion was quiet, real. A single shared melody hummed between them. No grand declarations. Just presence. Forgiveness blooming in a glance. And then, gone. That emotional economy, saying so much with so little, was something the film wielded with skill. But not all the praise came without caveats. Some critics found Drago Bloodfist underdeveloped, a villain more driven by force than complexity. They questioned his motivations, his backstory, his one-dimensional rage. Yet others argued that Drago was not meant to be a foil, but a contrast. He is what Hiccup could become if he let fear rule him, if he saw dragons only as tools. In that reading, Drago isn't a character to understand, he's one to resist. He is what Hiccup could become if he let fear rule him, if he saw dragons only as tools. In that reading, Drago isn't a character to understand, he's one to resist. The battle between the two alpha dragons also sparked debate. Visually, it was breathtaking. Two titans clashing in icy waters, the screen filled with scale and weight. But narratively, it risked overshadowing the smaller, more personal stakes. Some felt the emotional focus dimmed beneath the spectacle. Others believed that the contrast, between the bigness of the beasts and the intimacy of Hiccup and Toothless, was intentional. That amidst chaos, it's the personal choices that define the outcome. The film's cinematography, for an animated feature, was hailed as groundbreaking. Roger Deakins, the legendary cinematographer of films like Skyfall and Blade Runner 2049, served as a visual consultant. His influence can be seen in the way light moves across clouds, how shadows fold over cliffs, how dragon wings catch golden sun. This wasn't just animation, it was camera work, crafted in pixels. One scene in particular, the aerial dance between Toothless and Hiccup above the hidden dragon sanctuary, was cited as a visual poem. No dialogue, just flight, music, emotion. It captured, in pure cinematic language, the connection between man and beast, between freedom and trust. For many reviewers, it was the film's soul. The score, composed by John Powell, was another critical touchstone. Powell didn't just reprise themes from the first film. He evolved them, layered them. The music swelled and wept, reflecting the characters' journeys. For the dancing and the dreaming, Stoic and Valka's song became a symbol of what was lost and what was found. The funeral theme, minimal and aching, gave audiences permission to grieve. From a broader lens, critics acknowledged the film's ambition. It wasn't trying to sell toys. It wasn't padding out a franchise. It was telling a story about change, about growing up. That shift, from childlike wonder to adult consequence, is what sets How to Train Your Dragon 2 apart. It dares to say that the world doesn't always offer happy endings. That peace must be fought for. That leadership comes with cost. And yet, it never abandons hope. That balance, between light and shadow, joy and pain, is why the film resonated with so many. It doesn't talk down to children. It elevates them. It invites them into the complexity. And in doing so, it earns the loyalty of both kids and adults alike. Upon release, the film earned a standing ovation at Cannes. It went on to win the Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature and was nominated for an Academy Award. But beyond awards, its legacy lies in its courage. To let its hero fail. To let its dragon grow. To let its audience feel. Years later, fans still speak of the ship on fire. The silence after Stoich's fall. The moment Toothless flares blue, and the dragons bow. These moments aren't just scenes, they're emotional anchors. They remind us of who we were when we saw them, and who we wanted to become. Because at its core, How to Train Your Dragon 2 is a story about belief. In peace. In change. In each other. And that belief, like the flight of a dragon against the setting sun, is what lifts it above the clouds and keeps it there. There are films that are carefully constructed, piece by piece, like a puzzle where everything must fit just so. And then there are films that are discovered in flight, taking shape through wind, instinct, trial, and joy. How to Train Your Dragon 2 was the latter. A story about flight made by people who weren't just trying to follow up a surprise success, they were trying to evolve it. To make it fly higher, feel deeper, and leave behind not just a thrill, but a memory. It all started not with fire and wings, but with stillness. Writer-director Dean DeBlois didn't just sit down to write a sequel. He sat down to sketch an arc that would span 3 films. The studio had offered him something rare, a chance to craft a trilogy from the ground up, to guide Hiccup from the curious, uncertain boy of the first film into a leader tested by loss and love. DeBlois had one condition: complete creative control. DreamWorks said yes, and the flight began. But before a single dragon could take to the sky, the world had to grow. The first How to Train Your Dragon showed us Berk, a scrappy Viking island filled with wind, stubborn pride, and fire-scorched buildings. But the sequel demanded something bigger. The crew needed to explore the world beyond Berk, both geographically and emotionally. That meant building entirely new environments, from towering ice caves that glowed with bioluminescent light to windswept cliffs patrolled by dragon hunters. A team of artists, animators, and environmental designers worked in tandem for over a year to develop the sequel's visual language: richer, colder, more textured. The dragons weren't the only ones evolving. The world was too. One of the most striking achievements came with the creation of Valka's Dragon Sanctuary. It wasn't just a set, it was a character. This place had to feel ancient and alive, untouched by war or man. The animators studied volcanic landscapes, coral reefs, and deep-sea ecosystems to blend nature with fantasy. The glowing fungus that lights the cavernous halls? Modeled after real-life bioluminescent mushrooms found in the Amazon. The steam vents that hiss around dragon nests? Inspired by Icelandic geysers. And then there were the dragons themselves. The first film featured around a dozen distinct dragon species. The sequel would include over 200. Animators and designers unleashed their wildest imaginations, combining traits of birds, reptiles, mammals, and insects to create entirely new creatures. One team member joked that their concept artboard looked like a zoo caught in a blender. But every design had rules. Each dragon had to feel real. Their flight had to obey physics. Their movements had to express personality. Some, like the baby dragons, were given large heads and oversized eyes for immediate cuteness. Others, like Drago's enslaved monsters, were sharper, heavier, more ominous. And at the center of it all, once again, was Toothless. He may be the last of the Night Furies, but his evolution was far from over. The animators knew they couldn't simply repeat his movements from the first film. He had matured. He had confidence now. Power. So his body language became more upright, his flight smoother, his interactions more intentional. But he also had to retain that animalistic charm. His head tilts. His chirps. His cat-like crouches. It all mattered. Every twitch of his ear, every flick of his tail. Someone had studied real animals to get it just right. Dogs, cats, bats, falcons. Even big cats like panthers and jaguars were referenced to perfect Toothless every reaction. And then came the voice work. Animated films often record each actor separately, But for How to Train Your Dragon 2, DeBlois pushed for more shared sessions. When Jay Baruchel, Hiccup, recorded with America Ferrera, Astrid, the chemistry was immediate. They knew these characters now. They spoke in shorthand, teased, overlapped. Ferrera once slipped into Astrid's confident tone mid-scene and asked Baruchel, "So, Chief, you ready?" An unscripted moment that ended up inspiring a new beat in the final cut. One of the most surprising recording sessions involved Gerard Butler. Stoic's voice had to carry weight, gruff, deep, immovable. But when the scene came for Stoic to sing, for the dancing and the dreaming, to Valka, Butler hesitated. "You want me to sing?" he asked. DeBlois insisted. And when Butler finally did, something happened. His voice cracked, not from lack of skill, but from emotion. The moment was so raw that the audio engineers decided not to auto-tune a single note. What you hear in the film is what he gave them. Imperfect, honest, and deeply human. But perhaps the most unexpectedly touching dynamic happened off-screen, between the voice actors and the animators. The animators weren't just responding to lines. They were watching video footage of the actors during recording. Craig Ferguson, who voiced Gobber, had a tendency to act with his whole body, leaning in, flailing, making big expressions. The animators began syncing Gobber's eyebrows and mustache movements directly to Ferguson's own facial twitches. Even his hand gestures were recreated. "Craig practically storyboarded Gobber for us," said one of the character animators. "We just followed his lead." And then there was Kit Harington. Fresh off the early success of Game of Thrones, he joined as Eret, a cocky, dragon-catching mercenary. Harrington's natural brooding energy clashed hilariously with Kristen Wiig's improv-heavy take on Rough Nut. In several sessions, Wiig riffed non-stop, throwing lines like, "You're as muscular as a yak and twice as hairy." Harington, caught between embarrassment and deadpan delivery, held his ground. The result? Some of the film's funniest moments were born entirely from that oddball tension. One of the most unexpected creative pivots happened during storyboarding. Early on, the filmmakers planned for a different kind of battle finale, one where the dragons fought Drago's army in midair, with Toothless leading a synchronized aerial assault. But something didn't sit right. It felt too choreographed, too safe. So they stripped it back. What emerged instead was something more primal, a challenge of dominance. The Bewilderbeast versus Toothless. Not an army, but a duel of wills. The shift gave the climax more weight, more silence, more tension. And when Toothless stands alone, glowing blue, breathing deep, that was no longer just animation. That was character fulfillment. Behind the scenes, the team also contended with challenges far removed from the artistic process. The animation software itself had to be upgraded during production. The complexity of the environments, the lighting, and the sheer number of dragons pushed DreamWorks' rendering capacity to its limits. They introduced a new system called Apollo, allowing real-time lighting changes. With it, artists could tweak shadows and highlights instantly, giving them unprecedented control over mood and texture. This upgrade meant that scenes like the Alpha's glowing ice cave and Stoic's funeral pyre shimmered with the kind of layered detail that would have been unthinkable just a few years prior. Another behind-the-scenes marvel was the sound design. Every dragon had its own unique audio profile. Toothless vocalizations were created from a mix of elephant purrs, dolphin clicks, and tiger growls. But the sound designers went further. They created emotional versions of these sounds. For example, a worried purr or a victory chirp. These weren't stock noises. They were sculpted, layered, and matched to each scene by ear. In the moment when Toothless breaks free of the Alpha's control, his snarl shifts to something almost like a sob. And if you listen closely, you can hear the sound of wings shaking, like nerves coming back to life. And then came the music. John Powell's score had always been beloved, but for the sequel, he dug deeper. He blended Nordic instruments with orchestral swells, creating themes not just for characters but for emotions. Valka's scenes carried haunting flute lines, echoing solitude. The battle sequences thundered with war drums. And Toothless' transformation into Alpha was scored not with bombast, but with awe, a slow crescendo of hope. Powell even reused motifs from the first film but inverted them. Hiccup's flying theme, once light and breezy, returned slower, layered with cello, underscoring the burden he now carried. The music told a story within the story, one that ran parallel, often invisible, but always felt. When the film finally premiered, it didn't just meet expectations, it surpassed them. Critics called it one of the best sequels in animation history. Audiences wept and cheered. And DreamWorks had their triumph. But in the animation studios, the celebration was quieter. Artists gathered to watch their work come alive. Animators pointed to little touches, a blink they'd spent weeks perfecting, a tail flick that matched a drumbeat. The joy wasn't in the applause. It was in the process. And yet, one fun fact remains that most viewers never catch. In the opening dragon race sequence, one of the background dragons crashes into a tower and knocks off a flag. That moment wasn't scripted. It was an animator's joke, added late at night as a placeholder. But when the team watched it during a test screening, they laughed so hard that it stayed in. Now, it's canon. A blink-and-you'll-miss-it piece of dragon chaos, born from exhaustion and love. Even the final scene, Hiccup standing at the cliff's edge, Toothless at his side, was debated endlessly. Should it be triumphant? Somber? Should the music swell or stay still? The team tried 10 variations before settling on the one that made people tear up without knowing why. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. In the end, How to Train Your Dragon 2 wasn't just built. It was lived. Every laugh, every tear, every wing beat was touched by someone who believed in the magic of flight, not just on screen, but behind it. The fire, the wind, the sky, they weren't just effects. They were invitations to remember what it feels like to grow, to grieve, and to rise again. In the world of How to Train Your Dragon 2, the sky is not just a backdrop, it is a character, a playground, a battlefield, and a mirror. From the opening frames to the final moments, this sequel expands the horizon beyond the island of Berk and into territories both mystical and terrifying. And yet, even as the landscapes grow more epic, the emotional terrain becomes more intimate. It is a film where the wind is never just wind, it's memory. Where every mountain is etched with longing, and every shadow has a story behind it. To truly understand the magic of this film is to understand its world, how it breathes, shifts, and moves with the story, guiding the characters through their transformations with a painter's precision and a poet's rhythm. We begin, once again, in Berk. But it is not the Berk we remember. 5 years have passed, and the island has changed. It has grown not just in scale, but in spirit. Dragons are no longer feared. Now they are welcomed, celebrated, integrated into every facet of Viking life. And that shift is felt in every corner of Berk's design. The buildings are taller now, expanded with dragon perches and platforms. Rooftops double as landing pads, and what was once a town built for survival is now a thriving dragon haven. This architectural evolution isn't just a sign of peace, it's a sign of coexistence. Dragons have redefined the way the people of Berk live, and the visuals reflect that harmony. The colors are warmer. The textures richer. There's a joy to the town now that wasn't there before, a sense of kinetic energy in how people and dragons move together. During the opening dragon race sequence, the camera swoops through tight alleys and soaring towers, capturing a living, breathing culture built on flight. It's chaos, yes, but joyful chaos. From a cinematic standpoint, this scene is where the film declares its visual confidence. The camera is never static. It dives, it climbs, it circles. It becomes part of the game. And this kinetic cinematography sets the tone for the rest of the film. This world is meant to be felt in motion. But Berk is only the beginning. As Hiccup and Toothless take flight, the settings shift dramatically. The colors cool. The landscapes stretch out, and the sky becomes the dominant force in the frame. These flying sequences are some of the most breathtaking ever animated, not simply because of their technical brilliance, but because of how they're composed. The camera lingers in places it doesn't need to. It watches clouds drift. It frames Hiccup as a silhouette against a blood-orange sunset. It gives us space to feel. Cinematographer Roger Deakins, who served as a visual consultant, had one guiding principle for these scenes: treat them like live action. The digital camera had to behave like a real one. That meant natural lighting, realistic lens flares, subtle shifts in focus. The result is flight sequences that feel grounded in reality, even as they defy gravity. And yet, for all the beauty of the open sky, it's the hidden places that hold the film's soul. Midway through the story, Hiccup is led to a place lost to the world, a vast, secret dragon sanctuary carved out of a frozen sea. It's unlike anything we've seen. Ice columns rise like cathedral spires, glowing from within with soft, greenish-blue light. Mist hovers above the ground like breath. And dragons, hundreds of them, move in silence, their scales catching and reflecting the bioluminescence like living prisms. This setting isn't just visually stunning. It's sacred. It feels ancient, untouched, a place where the natural world has been allowed to flourish, protected by Valka and the Alpha Dragon. The production team spent months perfecting the lighting of this location. They wanted it to feel like being underwater and inside a glacier at the same time. Light filters in from above, but never harshly. It refracts. It dances. It whispers. Valka moves through this space like part of the wind. Her dragon glides between columns. Her home is carved into the ice, surrounded by quiet. And for a moment, the film slows. It breathes. This sanctuary becomes the visual representation of everything Hiccup believes is possible. A world where dragons are free, where humans live as guardians, not conquerors. But the ice does not last forever. As Drago's presence looms closer, the settings grow darker, harsher, more dangerous. Drago's fortress is a study in contrast. Where Berk is curved and organic, where the sanctuary is smooth and luminous, Drago's world is jagged, industrial, cold. His ships are spiked and asymmetrical, built not for travel but for war. Chains hang from masts like bones. Fires burn in iron pits. The sea itself seems angrier around him, choppier, blacker, as if rejecting his presence. The use of color and texture in these scenes is deliberate. Rust, soot, grease. Drago's world lacks harmony. There is no peace between man and dragon here, only dominance. And the cinematography reflects this. The camera is more rigid, the framing tighter. The skies, once vast and open, become boxed in by sails and smoke. And then, in the climax, the two worlds collide. The final battle takes place in a location that is both nowhere and everywhere, a fog-covered stretch of ocean that feels liminal, undefined, a space between worlds. And into this void, the two alpha dragons rise. One ancient and kind, the other brutal and weaponized. Their clash sends shockwaves through the sea, but the real battle is happening elsewhere, in the sky, where Toothless faces his own moment of truth. The cinematography here becomes poetic. The camera tilts, spins. It captures the swirl of emotion through movement, through contrast. Lightning flickers across the clouds. Rain begins to fall. But amidst all this noise, there's still silence. A moment when Toothless rises, glowing blue, framed not by fire but by courage. And the setting, the fog, the storm, the sea, becomes the canvas for his transformation. It's no accident that the storm begins to clear only after Toothless defeats the Alpha. The world responds to his choice. The light returns. The sea calms. And the dragons gather not in fear, but in reverence. The emotional resonance of this moment is enhanced by one final stroke of genius, the The return to Berk. The island is not what it was. It has changed. Stoik is gone. A funeral pyre has burned. But life moves forward. The film doesn't shy away from showing that. The harbor is rebuilt. The homes repaired. But there's a quietness now. A reverence. And when Hiccup steps forward as chief, when he surveys his home from the cliffs, the camera lingers. It doesn't need to tell us what he's thinking. The setting says it for him. Berk is not perfect, but it is his, and it is enough. Throughout the film, the use of visual motifs is subtle but powerful. Flight is freedom. Ice is memory. Fire is choice. These symbols repeat, not in dialogue, but in framing. When Hiccup and Toothless first fly together again after Stoik's death, they don't speak. The wind speaks for them. When Valka watches them from the shadows, it's not with envy, but with awe. And when Astrid stands at Hiccup's side, her silhouette matching his against the rising sun, it's a promise. That this world can be mended. That this sky can be shared. And finally, one of the most striking cinematic elements lies in the film's lighting. Technology, too, evolved during production. The Apollo animation engine was introduced, a game-changer in terms of lighting, motion blur, and environmental effects. With Apollo, animators could adjust light on the fly, simulate fur movement in wind, and create ice that refracted light realistically. It allowed for moments like Toothless Wings glowing blue as he entered alpha mode. That wasn't just design. That was built into the lighting code. His power lit the air around him. But production wasn't without its chaos. Halfway through the animation process, a system bug caused a major render farm crash. Nearly 20% of completed shots vanished. Panic rippled through the team. Deadlines were tight. Tempers ran high. But backups saved the day, barely. And in that pressure, something beautiful emerged. New versions of scenes were even better than the originals. One animator reworked a flight shot to include a spiral dive. Another added a mist effect to an alpha dragon roar. The team leaned into the challenge. And they rose. Music sessions, led by composer John Powell, were their own kind of magic. Recording took place at Abbey Road Studios in London. The orchestra filled the room with sweeping motifs, Nordic strings, Gaelic flutes, pounding drums. Powell would stop mid-session, tweak a single note, then restart the entire ensemble. "It has to feel like memory," he said, over and over. One violinist, during the funeral scene recording, reportedly wept while playing. Not because of the notes, but because of the weight in the room. Back in the U.S., the editorial team worked like surgeons. Scenes were trimmed by milliseconds. One scene, Hiccup approaching a mind-controlled Toothless, was edited 36 times. The timing had to be perfect, not too fast, not too slow. They even played it in reverse to test emotional pacing. And as the final mix came together, the crew started hosting night flights, late-night screenings of nearly finished scenes, projected in dark rooms with theater-grade sound. No talking allowed. No phones. Just flight. Just story. Animators would sit in silence, watching their work come alive. One artist, watching the scene of Stoik's funeral, whispered after, "It feels like we're saying goodbye to our own father." When the film wrapped, DreamWorks hosted a wrap party at a faux Viking hall built just for the occasion. Barrels of non-alcoholic mead, roasted meat, dragon-themed desserts. The cast came. The crew hugged. Jay Baruchel gave an impromptu speech and nearly cried. Gerard Butler picked up a stuffed dragon and made it sing. And somewhere in the corner, a crew member wore a rough nut wig and dramatically reenacted Kristen Wiig's muscle monologue. But the party wasn't really the end. Because How to Train Your Dragon 2 wasn't just a film, it was a memory. A shared dream. Every artist, animator, actor, and technician left a piece of themselves in those frames. Their laughter. Their mistakes. Their persistence. And when the film premiered, and the dragon soared, the audience felt it. Not just the flight, but the hands that lifted it. In the skies above Berk, dragons fly not just with wings but with meaning. The wind carries more than weather, it carries memory. Fire burns not just for spectacle but to illuminate something deeper. In How to Train Your Dragon 2, every gust of air, every echo of a dragon's roar, every moment of silence is laced with significance. Beneath its dazzling animation and heart-racing flight scenes lies something profound, a story built on themes that soar as high as its characters. And like the dragons themselves, these ideas do not announce themselves loudly. They curl into the corners of the story, hiding behind emotion, waiting to be felt more than spoken. At its core, the film is about becoming. It is a story of inheritance, not of land or wealth, but of identity, responsibility, and belief. Hiccup begins the film not as the boy we once knew, and not yet as the man he will become. He is suspended in flight, caught between the ideals he clings to and the reality that is coming for him. Berk has entered a golden age, and Hiccup wants to believe that peace can last, that diplomacy can reach anyone, that every enemy can be a future ally. It's a noble hope, but one the world, as the film will show him, does not always reward. The tension between peace and force becomes the spine of the story's thematic structure. Stoic, Hiccup's father, represents the old world, where safety meant strength and leadership meant command. Hiccup challenges that view with every breath. He believes in bridges, not walls. But the film is not content to let either side win easily. Instead, it explores the difficult space between ideals and necessity. Can peace exist if only one side wants it? Can leadership be gentle in a world where enemies aren't? Drago, the antagonist, is not just a villain. He is a symbol of the very worldview Hiccup resists. Where Hiccup believes dragons can be partners, Drago believes they must be controlled. Where Hiccup offers trust, Drago demands obedience. And it is in this contrast that the film poses one of its most haunting questions. What happens when your ideals cost you everything? Because for Hiccup they do. He chooses peace. He chooses words. He refuses to fight. And in return, he loses his father. Not to a sword, not to a villain's blade, but to his own dragon, his own belief system turned against him. That moment, when Toothless fires under the Alpha's control, is more than a plot twist. It's a symbolic rupture. It is the world telling Hiccup that belief alone is not always enough. And yet, he does not abandon it. That is the heart of the film. Not that Hiccup is right, or that Stoic is. But that belief, to be meaningful, must endure even after it breaks you. Hiccup rises again. Not as a boy clinging to peace, but as a leader who knows its cost. This transformation is mirrored in Toothless, whose arc runs parallel. Toothless isn't just a dragon. He is Hiccup's soul made flesh. When he is controlled by the Alpha, it symbolizes Hiccup's loss of control over his world, his choices, his future. But when Toothless resists, when he breaks free not through power but through memory, through love, that is the film's most powerful statement. That what binds us is not domination. It's connection. The bond between Hiccup and Toothless is more than friendship. It's the film's primary metaphor for trust, for understanding, for unity in the face of division. And when Toothless glows with blue flame, when he becomes the new Alpha, it isn't because he is stronger than the old one. It is because he is chosen, not by fear, but by love. The dragons bow not because they are forced to, but because they believe in him. In a world obsessed with power, that is radical. Another theme woven through the film is that of legacy and family. The return of Valka, Hiccup's long-lost mother, brings with it more than backstory. She is a symbol of the life Hiccup could have had, a life of wild freedom, of communion with dragons, of escape from human constraints. Where Stoic represents the world Hiccup was raised in, Valka represents the one he dreams of. But Valka, too, must learn. She ran from her duty. She chose dragons over people. And the film does not judge her for it, but it asks her to return, to rejoin the human world, to find balance. Her arc parallels Hiccup's in a quiet, reflective way. Both believe in dragons. Both feel alien among their own kind. And both must eventually accept that belief is not enough. Powell's score often does the emotional heavy lifting, yes, but light is the film's secret weapon. It guides us from scene to scene, from Golden Burke to Pale Sanctuary, from the warm, flickering glow of Stoich's torch to the cold blue of Toothless Alpha State. Every emotional beat is matched by a change in temperature, in brightness, in hue. And in the final scene, as Hiccup and Toothless rise into the air, the sun at their backs, the frame widens. The wind picks up. The world opens once more. And we are reminded, without a single word, that the story is not over. That there is still sky ahead. Still space to fly. Still hope. And that is the power of setting. Not just to place us in a world, but to become the world. To echo what we feel. To teach us how to see. And in How to Train Your Dragon 2, every mountain, every wave, every gust of wind does just that. It doesn't just show us where the story takes place. It shows us why it matters. Before any dragon could roar, before a single wing could cut through the sky, there were rooms full of wires, tablets, coffee cups, and people trying to find magic in silence. Because animated films don't have sets the way live-action films do. They don't have location shoots, prop departments, or weather delays. What they have is something different, something quieter but no less filled with sparks, studios humming with the tapping of styluses, storyboards pinned to walls like fragments of dreams, and a team of hundreds weaving a world one breath at a time. Behind the scenes of How to Train Your Dragon 2, the flight didn't begin with dragons. It began with people, laughing, arguing, sketching, coding, and pushing themselves towards something bigger than pixels and frames. The process started like most great stories do, in a room with a blank wall. Dean DeBlois, returning solo as writer and director after co-directing the first film with Chris Sanders, was given a rare kind of opportunity. DreamWorks didn't just want a sequel, they wanted a trilogy. And they wanted him to dream it up from scratch. So, armed with that trust and a very sharp pencil, DeBlois began sketching. Literally. He drew scenes long before he wrote them. He imagined Toothless glowing blue before the plot even justified it. He saw Stoich singing before he knew why. His office slowly transformed into a storyboard map of emotions, action, and moments waiting for music. And then came the voice cast. Jay Baruchel returned as Hiccup, his voice slightly deeper, his delivery more assured. But the real difference wasn't in tone, it was in rhythm. Baruchel understood Hiccup now in a way he hadn't before. He knew when to let a line trail off, when to hold his breath, when to lean into sarcasm. He recorded alone sometimes, but DeBlois pushed for paired sessions where possible. When Baruchel recorded scenes with America Ferrera, Astrid, the chemistry lit up the booth. They riffed. They corrected each other mid-line. In one scene, where Hiccup nervously dances around saying, "I love you," Ferrera unexpectedly cut him off with a deadpan. "You're the chief now, say it like you mean it," which wasn't in the script. They kept it, because it felt real. Gerard Butler, too, brought more than just a booming voice. He brought gravitas. When Stoich reunites with Valka, there's a moment where he hums a song from their past, for the dancing and the dreaming. Butler was hesitant. "You want me to sing?" he asked, eyebrows raised. But he did. And when he did, the room fell silent. Cate Blanchett, who voiced Valka, responded in kind. Their harmonies were imperfect, a little cracked, but that was the point. They weren't polished performers. They were two characters finding each other again through melody. The sound team, overwhelmed by the authenticity, decided to keep it as raw as possible. Barely edited, untouched by auto-tune. Blanchett herself was one of the film's biggest surprises. A late addition to the cast, she joined after hearing her children talk endlessly about the first film. She loved the idea of playing a mysterious mother who'd lived among dragons, someone who was both a wild woman and a healer. In her early sessions, she brought her own ideas. "Valka shouldn't sound royal," she said. "She should sound feral, like she's been living on wind and memory." And so the team adjusted. They added breathiness to her vocal tracks, made her speech more measured. Her delivery became less about grandeur, more about wonder. But the real alchemy happened when the voices met the animators. Every voice actor was filmed during recording, not just for reference, but for emotional texture. The animators watched those videos on loop. They studied how Craig Ferguson, Gobber, gestured when he laughed, how Jonah Hill's eyes darted during a snotlout brag, how Kit Harington, Errett, subtly clenched his jaw before speaking. All those quirks became animation gold. Gobber's mustache twitch? That was Ferguson's idea, acted out during a monologue about dragons with rotten breath. The team loved it so much, they gave Gobber his own set of twitchy facial feathers. And then there was Kristen Wiig. No one, absolutely no one, cracked up the animation team more than Kristen Wiig as Rough Nut. She improvised constantly, went on tangents that lasted minutes. In one session, she spent 5 uninterrupted minutes describing Errett's muscles as gravy ropes of power and thunder thighs sculpted by Thor himself. The sound editors couldn't stop laughing. A few lines made it into the final film. Others lived on in studio lore as the single greatest outtake reel DreamWorks had ever assembled. Outside the booths, the real heavy lifting was happening frame by frame. Each second of the film required thousands of hours of rendering. But that process wouldn't begin until everything had been built. The storyboards, the animatics, animated storyboards, the voice tracks, the lighting plans, and the blocking. Teams collaborated across continents. Artists in California synced with teams in India and Asia, passing scenes like batons in a race that spanned time zones. The Dragon Sanctuary, Valka's glowing, icy paradise, proved to be the single most complex set the studio had ever attempted. It contained over 2,000 animated dragons in one frame. The lighting was layered. Soft blues, warm greens, the shimmer of ice. The technical render took over a week for just one shot. But the effort was worth it. When the sanctuary was complete, the crew gathered in a screening room. The lights dimmed. The first full render played. There was no applause. Just stunned silence. Someone whispered, "We made a cathedral." Technology, too, evolved during production. The Apollo animation engine was introduced, a game-changer in terms of lighting, motion blur, and environmental effects. With Apollo, animators could adjust light on the fly, simulate fur movement in wind, and create ice that refracted light realistically. It allowed for moments like Toothless Wing's glowing blue as he entered alpha mode. That wasn't just design. That was built into the lighting code. His power lit the air around him. But production wasn't without its chaos. Halfway through the animation process, a system bug caused a major render farm crash. Nearly 20% of completed shots vanished. Panic rippled through the team. Deadlines were tight. Tempers ran high. But backups saved the day, barely. And in that pressure, something beautiful emerged.